Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's professional development session on new quizzes in Canvas. What are new quizzes? Are there new quizzes in Canvas? Well, yeah, and actually they're not as new as they used to be. New quizzes is the new testing system in Canvas. New relative to the original testing engine that we've been using for years since we started with Canvas, which is called Classic Quizzes now. It is a brand new testing engine, has new capabilities, new code, everything. And it is intended to eventually replace the classic quizzing engine that we've been using for a long time. You see there on the slide, it says 2024. And we have been told several dates over the years upon which new quizzes will replace classic quizzes and classic quizzes will no longer be available to us. And Canvas has, this project at Canvas or at Instructure has been a bit of a more of a journey for them than they really expected. So they keep pushing that date back. At one point, they were telling us we were all supposed to already be on new quizzes by now, by the end of 2022. But they backed off on that a long time ago. The last word we had, the last time I did this session, was that we would be required to use new quizzes and would no longer have access to classic quizzes in the summer of 2024. But just recently, Canvas has, our Instructure, the company that provides Canvas, has changed their minds yet again, and they're saying now that they've eliminated any sunset date for now for classic quizzes. So if you're going to ask me, as someone should be wondering right now, when do I, my God, when are classic quizzes going away? When am I going to have to use new quizzes and have to use what we're going to be talking about today in this session? And the answer is we don't know. There's no date set right now. For the foreseeable future, at least, Instructure is going to allow us to continue using classic quizzes while still providing us access to new quizzes, which is sort of an ideal circumstance for us. They just haven't been quite able to get the new quizzes system ready for prime time. Most of it is working at this point in time, and it's quite usable, and it's reliable. You can trust it with your students. And there are lots of faculty at the district using new quizzes. Some of them are probably in this session, and some of them may know more about this than I do from experience. So please feel free to speak up if you have something to share in that regard. But for now, we can assume that we have both testing engines to work with. Both types of quizzes can be used in Canvas. Remember, Canvas refers to any test, anything from a 2-question pop quiz to a 100-question multiple choice exam as a quiz. It's all quizzes to Canvas. So the classic quizzing engine is going to remain available to us for the foreseeable future, but we're going to continue to have the capability to use new quizzes. Because the new quizzes do offer significant improvements in some areas over classic quizzes. But there are still things you can do in classic quizzes that you can't do in new quizzes, and Instructure is not going to force us to transition exclusively to new quizzes until they get those issues dealt with. and have at least near feature parity between the two systems. So we got to use what we want. And it's not clear exactly how long that it's going to take Instructure to finish new quizzes. They've been working on this for about 5 or 6 years now. So we're not going to get into a tizzy about worrying about classic quizzes going away anytime soon. I don't think we don't have any hard drop dead dates on that for now. And Canvas has listened, Instructure has listened to its user base, which the company's better about that than most educational software providers. And they've heard that, we're just not ready. We don't trust new quizzes enough, or there are things that we need to do in our quizzing that we can't yet do in new quizzes. And we don't want to be forced to use new quizzes exclusively until those things are fixed. And Canvas has listened, or Instructure has listened, and so there's not the sense of urgency that once accompanied this presentation, which we've done several times before. So what are the differences? That's a good question that we might ask. What's new that's nice in new quizzes, and what are new quizzes still missing? What features are new quizzes still missing that we're used to having in classic quizzes? And we've got a spreadsheet here that will show us some of these issues. I'm not going to go through every feature and every line here. I've marked some of the things that are not working in new quizzes in red, and I've marked some of the nice new features in green on this spreadsheet, and I'm going to concentrate on those. As I say, I'm not going to take you through everything. Yep, this will, classic quizzes will do this, new quizzes will do the same thing. No, we're not going to worry about that. But we see a bit more red than green right now, unfortunately, which is why Instructure is not forcing us to use new quizzes at this point. One issue with new quizzes is you can't export the quiz as a file that you can then that will allow you to take that file and import the quiz into another course. And that's something we do fairly frequently in many cases with classic quizzes. So that's a problem. They haven't fixed that yet. Also, new quizzes does not work with third-party proctoring software at this point in time, whereas classic quizzes does, or classic quizzes do, I should say. This is not as big an issue as it might be because proctoring software, online proctoring software or services are somewhat controversial at this point in time, vis-a-vis student privacy, just the general idea that we have our students have to be watched by some external entity while they're taking their quizzes online and things like that. It's very controversial. It's not used widely anyway at our district at this point in time, or in the California community colleges in general. But certainly, moving forward, we would want that option if things change in that regard. And that's something that new quizzes do not yet allow. But for now, that's not a big deal. In classic quizzes, we have test banks that we can use, where we can have our quizzes just pull questions from test banks that we load into our Canvas courses. That same feature is available in new quizzes. They've changed the terminology to avoid avoid confusion, though I think perhaps they've generated more by making the change. But test banks in classic quizzes are called question banks. Test banks in new quizzes are called item banks. They're the same thing, same idea, but they're not cross-compatible. That is, you can't take a question bank that was developed for use in classic quizzes and use it in new quizzes. You have to convert it into a question bank into an item bank to use the questions in that test bank in new quizzes. And unfortunately, that process is not what you'd call automatic. It's about a 7-step process that you have to go through, and it's kind of a hack, kind of a workaround. So that can be an issue. If you use a lot of question banks in your classic quizzes, use a lot of questions from question banks in your classic quizzes, new quizzes are going to present something of a problem, because the process to convert a question bank into an item bank takes about, if you've done it a few times, takes about 5 to 10 minutes per bank. And if you've got 100 question banks, that's going to be an unacceptable amount of time. So we may have to wait. Eventually, instructor promises us that there'll be a process to where we can automatically convert all our question banks to item banks without having to do them one at a time in a manual process. But that ain't here yet. And that's one of the reasons they're not making a switch to new quizzes just yet. If you generate your questions for your tests in Canvas fresh, mostly each time you create a new quiz, that's not going to be an issue for you. So far, everything's been a negative that we've talked about. Now, there are some wonderful things, though, like sharing question banks. That's relatively difficult to do in classic quizzes, sharing them with other courses, other instructors, and other user accounts on Canvas, or sharing them with multiple courses. But that process is much easier in new quizzes. So that's a plus for new quizzes. If you're sharing your question banks with other instructors, for instance, it's a lot easier to do with new quizzes. Also, printing a quiz in classic quizzes is not really very well supported. There are ways to do it. There are workarounds to do it, but it's, again, a kind of a clunky process. And occasionally, let's say you have a student in an online class or a hybrid course who's not able, for one reason or another, to take their quizzes online through Canvas. Occasionally is often associated with a DSPS accommodation. There may be times when you need to take a quiz that you've generated in Canvas and print it out on paper so a student can take it on paper. That's difficult to do with classic quizzes, much easier to do with new quizzes. Maybe the biggest irritation with new quizzes is something that Canvas has decided to leave out and has no plans to change their mind. In classic quizzes, we can use the testing engine to create non-graded surveys. So we can survey our classes, our students, about various issues. And that's built into the classic testing engine in Canvas. Instructure has no plans to include that capability in new quizzes. It's not there now, and it's never going to be there. They're going to force us to use some other external tool to do surveys. Now, there are lots of such tools available, and many of them are free, but it requires learning a new tool and going outside of Canvas to do it. So that's probably the single issue that's generated more heat than any others I've heard in meetings. And Canvas is sticking to their guns on that one so far. They're adamant that they're not going to give you the capability to create non-graded surveys in new quizzes, so that when classic quizzes go away, you're going to lose that capability in Canvas. Not that you can't do it some other way. Another fairly major aggravation right now is the rich content editor in Canvas, the editor that you use everywhere when you're creating an announcement or a discussion post or a Canvas page, or if the editor that you use when you're creating quiz questions in classic quizzes is the rich content editor. And the rich content editor underwent a major upgrade about a year and a half ago now. And new quizzes have not caught up with that. When you're creating questions and other things in the new quizzes testing engine, you're using the old version of the rich content editor, which most of us have moved on from and forgotten all about by now. So that can be occasionally inconvenient. Though it's not that big a deal if you're just typing text. You're typing test questions as text and question answers in multiple choice quizzes and so on, or multiple choice questions as text. It's not that really doesn't matter. But when you start doing more, creating more complex questions where you include images and video and things like that in your questions or in the answers, possible answers to the questions, then the lack of the availability of the new rich content editor is certainly more of an issue. Just got a request for captioning to be activated. Actually, Zoom now activates captioning automatically. You should just be able to click on the little CC symbol in your tool, in your Canvas menu at the bottom, or excuse me, Zoom menu at the bottom of the page, and turn on your captions. Okay. Maybe the best new thing to me about new quizzes are 4 new question types, these green bars here, that the categorization questions, stimulus questions, ordering questions, and hotspot questions. We'll look at examples of these here in a few minutes. These are 4 new question types that were not available in classic questions, and they really add a lot of assessment options to new quizzes that were not available in classic quizzes. So that's one of the best things about new quizzes. Oops, jumped ahead there. There we go. Another thing that we've wanted forever, or that many people I've talked to have wanted forever in classic quizzes, was the ability to automatically randomize the order in which questions are presented to each different student, so that when 2 students take the same test, they may get the same questions, but they won't be in the same order. That capability was not easy to implement in classic quizzes, still isn't. There is a way to do it, but it's kind of a kludge, a very counterintuitive workaround. But in new quizzes, you can just check a box and automatically see that the questions are presented to different students in different orders. Also, when you're doing things like DSPS accommodations, where you have to allow students to have accommodated students to have more time to take a quiz, there's certainly a way to do that in classic quizzes without having to create multiple quizzes and so on. It's actually, that feature is pretty well implemented in classic quizzes. But the process is a little tedious because you have to set up each quiz in your course separately to allow a student or a certain group of students to have more time relative to the amount of time being allowed for the rest of the class. In new quizzes, you can set up your entire course at one time to allow that. You can you can identify your students who are for whom you're obligated to give more time on quizzes at the beginning of the term, and you can have that affect all of the quizzes, the new quizzes that you create in the course automatically without you having to go in and set that up in each quiz. That can save you a lot of time. Most of these others are pretty minimal. Okay, so those are the major changes, at least in my way of thinking, to that you encounter in going from classic quizzes to new quizzes. Some of them good, some of them bad. In most of the cases for the red lines here, most of those are going to go away eventually. Instructure is going to fix that, particularly the issue of migrating the question banks, which is maybe one of the more time-consuming and more show-stopping type processes, but they haven't finished that yet. They swear they're dedicating lots more resources to this now. It's their #1 priority, and we'll see. But for the foreseeable future, we can use new quizzes in situations where they're beneficial to us and continue using classic quizzes when that's not the case. And the new quizzes and classic quizzes look pretty much alike to students. So there's not a huge learning curve for students, or much of a learning curve at all for students in taking a new quiz versus taking a classic quiz. It all looks pretty much the same to them. So the main extra cognitive load associated with using new quizzes in your Canvas courses along with classic quizzes is on the instructor, not on the student, which is, considering the options, that's better. So that's kind of an overview of the differences here. Let's go take a look at a lot of that in more detail now. The first thing you learn about any new software system is how to get help. So we're gonna cover that right off the bat. This slide here gives you some good resources for that. Instructure has created a new quizzes hub, which is a central information repository for new quizzes and the processes that they're going through to implement them. That hub looks like this. You've got updates on status. You've got their tutorial guides are available right here, both for instructors and students. There's some transition information. That's not something that we're not having to transition right now and eliminate classic quizzes. But and there's a discussion forum that you can go in and look at and participate in if you like. And there's they give you some information on where they're going and when they expect things to happen and so on. So this is certainly a useful item to have. There are a couple of good videos that you can use to get informed right off the bat. There's one for instructors and one for students, and those are linked here. Not going to play those for you right now. You can look at those later. We have also created our own set of tutorials, and this is a more detailed set of tutorials which covers a number of aspects of new quizzes. Indeed, covers everything I'm going to cover today, and probably a lot more efficiently. So why didn't he tell us that beforehand? Well, it's nice to see you all. It's nice to have somebody to talk to here today. But everything I'm going to cover is covered in these video tutorials that we have online. If I click there, these tutorials are on our Open On Demand site at sdccdolvid.org up there. This is a link. Let me put that in the chat tool. I always try to do that at least once here during the session. This is our online learning pathways to video tutorial site. And that link will take you to this set of tutorials on new quizzes. From activating it, and we're going to cover most of this today as well, but probably not in quite as much detail because these tutorials add up to more than 2 hours. But turning on new quizzes in your course, it's turned off by default, but you can turn them on at any time. Creating new quizzes, migrating classic quizzes. If you decide you like the new quiz engine and the way it presents to students, you can migrate your classic quizzes to new quizzes with just like one mouse click. There's nothing to it. Question banks is another matter, and I'll show you that today, or at least give you the link to that. And then the 4 new question types are kind of complex. So there are separate tutorials on each of the new question types. So-called stimulus questions, ordering questions are very simple. You just give students a series of items and they have to put them in some logical order, chronological or whatever. Hotspot questions, a lot of fun. I'll demonstrate that one for sure. Or categorization questions, where students have to put various items in categories that you define. Those are your new question types, and there's a specific tutorial on each one of those question types, showing how to create them and showing what they look like to students. So this set of tutorials, as I say, will cover the vast majority of what I cover today, and in some cases more. So that's worth having the link to. I have this presentation, the slide deck, available online. Let me give you the link to that. So you have these links. And there it is. You can just click on that link in the chat that just popped up in the chat tool, and this slide deck will pop up. You can follow along if you like, or just bookmark it somewhere so that you can get back to it whenever you're interested. Okie dokie. Let's go back to our current slides. So with this information, you can pretty much figure out new quizzes yourself. It's not, if you're used to classic quizzes, new quizzes are not that dramatically different. But it's nice to have somebody walk you through it, and that's what I'm here for today. So the first thing we'll talk about in more detail is how to make new quizzes in your Canvas course. And the first thing we'll talk about is how to make that possible, because the new quizzes testing engine is turned off in your Canvas courses, the new Canvas course shells that you get by default. But it's real simple to turn it back on, or to turn it on. Let's see how we do that. To illustrate this and most of the other things we're going to be talking about today, I've got a little sandbox Canvas course here that I can do anything I want to in and not have to worry about messing up somebody's running course. And obviously, I've already got new quizzes turned on in this one, but I'm going to show you where to look for that. To enable new quizzes in your Canvas course, you'll go in your course, and this has to be done course by course, shell by shell. So if you have 3 or 4 new shells for the new semester and you want to use new quizzes in them, you got to turn on new quizzes in each course. Go to the settings link in the course menu to do that, and go to the feature options tab at the top of the page. And there's an entry for new quizzes. In your course at this point, that will be across from a little red X in a circle here. To turn this on, you just click the red X and change disabled to enabled. Click on enabled to turn it on. That's all it takes. It takes about 10 seconds to turn on new quizzes in your course. Again, that's under feature options on the settings page in each course shell. So you can turn this on in all of your courses in just a couple of minutes. No big deal. So that's easy. Let's hope the rest of it's that easy. Huh? All right. So let's see how do we make a new quiz? Let's look at that. Excuse me. Oops. It's not the one I wanted. Pardon me. Here we go. That's more like it. The easiest way to make a new quiz is to go to your quizzes tool in your course menu. And I have a number of quizzes here already. To make a new quiz, I just use this Add Quiz button up here in the upper right. And when I click that, once you have enabled new quizzes in your course, you'll be asked this question each time you go to make a quiz, an additional quiz. You'll be asked whether you want it to be a classic quiz or a new quiz. And you just make the selection you want. If you don't ever want to go back to using classic quizzes again, you can tell Canvas to remember this choice for this course, and won't be prompted for this anymore. But then you have to go through a couple of hoops to get back to status quo ante, where you can actually make classic quizzes again. So I don't recommend checking this unless you're really, really, really sure that you want to use new quizzes exclusively. So we'll make a new quiz just by selecting new quizzes here and clicking submit. And the first thing we notice is this is a different creation screen than we have for classic quizzes. And it doesn't say anything about quizzes at this point. It talks about assignments. In fact, deep down in the source code in Canvas, new quizzes are treated more like homework assignments than they are like quizzes. They're still graded as quizzes, and they'll still have quiz questions and so on. But the process of creating a new quiz is more like the process of creating a homework assignment than it was like the process of creating a classic quiz. So don't let that throw you. Where it says assignment name, that means what's the name of this new quiz? And call it whatever we like. I'm going to call this new quiz for seminar 11/16/2022. So I know which one this was when I go back to look at it. And here's something quite different that we see right off the bat with creating new quizzes versus classic quizzes. When we create a classic quiz, it doesn't ask us how many points we want the quiz how many possible points we want the quiz to represent in our grading scheme. Because in a classic quiz, the possible points for a quiz is just the sum of the possible points for each of the questions in the quiz. So at this point in time, you don't know necessarily how many points the quiz is going, a classic quiz is going to contain. You determine that as you add questions and set a number of points for each question. Not so with new quizzes. So, well, how do you know that? You know, unless you've written the whole thing out on paper, how do you know how many points this is going to, possible points this new quiz is going to represent? This is one of the harder things to grasp, I think, about new quizzes. You get to, decide at this point how many points you want this quiz to count in your grading scheme, in your grade book. You get to decide what the possible points for this assessment are going to be. This can make it a lot easier when you're weighting the various assessments that you use in your Canvas course. This can make it a lot easier for you to weight tests. Let's say you've promised the students that the tests, your quizzes will represent 30% of their grade. And say you have a, well, let's just, for the sake of argument, say you have 200 possible points in your course. Well, 30% of that would be 60 points, right? And let's say you have 3 tests. Well, that process gets kind of complicated if you're doing classic quizzes, because then you have to make sure that when you create a classic quiz, if you want it to each quiz to count 20 points, you have to be very careful in assigning points to individual questions within that test. Not so with a new quiz. If say I want this new quiz to be worth 20 points in my grading scheme, I just type that in. So, and that does not mean that when I add questions to my test, that the point values of all the questions have to add up to 20 points. Because what Canvas is going to do when it puts a grade for a new quiz in your grade book is that it is going to, when a student takes the quiz, the student will get some percentage of the points for the questions in that test right. Well, what Canvas will do in determining how many points to award the student in your grade book is it will calculate a percentage grade for the student's attempt. And then it will multiply the point value that you place here by that percentage. So let's say a student got 80% of the points in a new quiz correct. Then what would appear in the grade book for this new quiz would be 16 points, 80% of 20. So Canvas does all that arithmetic for you, and it makes it a lot easier to weight your tests in your grading scheme. So this is a pretty good improvement, but it takes a little doing to wrap your head around it. How can I be sure that I'm getting the right number of possible points here? Well, you just type it in and let Canvas do the rest of the arithmetic for you. Then you have the usual stuff. What assignment group do you want this to be part of? How do you want to display the grade in the grade book? We're not going to spend a lot of time on that here. If you want this to be a practice test, you'll notice there's no option for that here at this point, as there was in the classic quizzes creation screen. But all you have to do is tell Canvas not to count this toward the student's final grade, and that would make it a practice test. The student will get a grade and so on, but it won't affect their final grade. All this stuff you leave alone. There's nothing you can do. You do have the assign to block here, just as you do with classic quizzes or homework assignments or any other assessment, where you can determine who is going to take this quiz, usually everyone. And you can set due dates and availability dates, just as you can with any other assessment in Canvas. This is identical to what you had in the classic quizzes creation screen and the homework assignment creation screen and a creation screen for graded discussions. So none of that's changed. So we're not going to worry about that right now. So basically, all I have to do when I'm creating a class or a new quiz is to give it a name and a number of possible points and move on. In classic quizzes at this point, we had a couple of tabs up here, and one tab contained details, test details, options about how the quiz is going to be treated, and another tab dealt with the questions. Here, to access all that information, you just go to this new button that we've never seen before called Build. And this is where you continue the process, how you continue the process of creating a new quiz. All right, so we have a brand new, this is totally different from or pretty much different from the classic quizzes creation screen. We've got 4 tabs up here at the top. Build is analogous to the questions tab in the old classic quizzes. Build is where you're going to actually add questions to the new quiz. Settings is where you're going to set quiz details, quiz options. You also have some reports. You can do quiz and item analysis, and we don't use outcomes at the SDCCD in Canvas, so that's not of immediate interest to us, but quiz and item analysis is available for new quizzes. And you also have a moderate tab, and we'll look at each of these, except for the reports. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but we'll look at these other 3 tabs individually in more detail. So you're going to start out and build. And this is where you type in, you have the chance to change the name of the quiz if you want to. You can just click on that and edit it. You can also add instructions. You just click just below instructions here. You get the rich content editor, and you can create instructions to your heart's content. Those who look carefully at that will see that that is the old rich content editor, as we mentioned before. You don't get the nice new rich content editor when you're creating instructions or question text or answer text in new quizzes yet. Not quite sure why. That's one they're working on hard, and they hope to have, they hope to phase in the new rich content editor over the next few months into new quizzes. But for now, if you're just typing in text, you really don't notice it. So we might type something like answer or choose the best answer for each objective question. Answer essay questions as completely as possible. Can't believe I got through an entire sentence without making a typo. Not one of my not one of my strengths. So we can provide instructions, or maybe not. I mean, students know what to do when you slap the test in front of them. They're going to answer the questions. But you do have that option. If I click done, now I've got my my instructions and the name of my quiz created. What do I do? Let's check and see if this new interface is as intuitive as Instructure thinks it is. What do I do to add my first question? Everybody awake out there? Still with me? Just unmute. Let me know. Where am I going to click to add my first question?
Is it the plus?
The plus. Yeah. Exactly. That's one for instructure. This plus sign allows you to add a question. When you click that, you see all of the different question types that you have available to you. This is almost all the question types that you had before, with, I think, maybe one exception. Actually, there are about two that did not come over from classic quizzes, but there are workarounds for that. So there's really not much of a difference. The old standbys, multiple choice, multiple answer, true, false, essay questions. But we have the four new ones: categorization, hotspot, ordering, and stimulus questions. And we'll see what those new ones look like here in a little bit. But let's just start with an old standby. Let's go with a multiple choice question. Then we get a multiple choice creation screen, which is not really very different from the same screen that we get with classic quizzes. We're going to, we can optionally create a title for the question. We don't have to. We do have to enter the text of the question. The prompt here is add question stem. In classic quizzes, it says add question text. Same thing. You type the question. Like, which of the following statements about your SDCCD Zoom accounts is not true? I'm just picking something off the top of my head here.
Dave, I have a question.
Go for it.
So at the top where you were able to name, label your question, is that like in classic quizzes, just to remind us of what questions were in there? That's not
Yes.
viewable to students, is that correct?
Yeah, that you don't even have to put that in.
It's helpful for me. It's a convenient for me. I've definitely
and it's
used it as I built quizzes.
Right, it's the same as it would be in classic.
Okay, that's my
Great
that
question.
was my I just want to make sure the students can't see it, and therefore
no, this is not something the students see. The students see the question and the possible answers, but they don't see the title. You do, but they don't.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so now we just put in our answers. And each time we click on an answer, we automatically get the rich content editor, which is kind of nice. But again, it's the old rich content editor. So you have to go back. If you want to do something fancy, like put an image into a possible answer, which you might well, or into the question text itself, you have to use the old rich content editor. And this
Dave, I have one more question about that.
Good.
So my most common mistake in classic quizzes is that I forget to change away from the letter A detractor on multiple choice questions. And so my students are like, I thought I got this right, but it says I got it wrong because I forget that it automatically chooses A as the correct answer if you don't check the box. So I'm wondering if this works the same way.
Yeah, you can see the first one is automatic.
It's already selected.
Yes. So
okay, I'm going to keep making that mistake.
We're going to still have that happening. That's right.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to be better at it, but inevitably, after 100 questions,
it's the one thing. You spend all the skull sweat on creating a question and creating all those good distractor answers and so on. Then you forget at the last minute to put in the right answer. And Canvas defaults to the first answer as the right answer. And it'd be better if if you didn't select the correct answer. It'd be better if it just gave you an error message saying, oh, "What's the answer?" I don't know.
I agree with you. It would be
I
better to
wish it
make
would
sure
do
that
that,
we
but
did not
no.
make those mistakes.
Yeah, no,
As
apparently
you know.
not.
Well, let's
Really.
suggest it to InStructure.
Yeah, you can actually suggest enhancements to InStructure, and that would be a good one. I'd like to have that myself because I've done that very thing too many times. All right. So what's the first answer? Which of the following statements is not true? All faculty and staff at the SECCD can have a Zoom account. I think that's one. I'm not gonna. I'll hopefully remember to go back and set the right answer here in a minute. That's not it. Let's see. Up to 300 students can access your Zoom meetings. Why I do that? Students must have a Zoom account to access your meetings. And finally, your meetings have no time limits. Anybody know which one of those is not true? See, or the third one. Students don't have to have Zoom accounts in your meetings. There are no time limits in the meetings. You can have up to 300 students in there, and everybody at the district, any employee, full or part-time at the district, can receive and eventually will automatically receive a Zoom account. So there's our first multiple choice question. And when I'm done with it, I have some options that I can choose. New quizzes, another nice feature in new quizzes is that it features an on-screen calculator or that's available. In this case, that's not going to be useful, but if this were a math problem or some arithmetic were involved, you can provide the students with an on-screen calculator so you can be sure that everyone has the same access to a calculator. You can also have it have different answers, have different numbers of point values. That gets pretty complicated. Or you can have the questions, the answers to the questions shuffled so that no two students gets the possible answers in the same order. Or if, well, let's say you, obviously there are not that many different orders, but the order in which the possible answers are presented to students are randomized. So students can't say, well, you know, the answer to, if they're of a mind to cheat, they can't say, well, the answer to the first question is the third option, because it may not be the same for everyone if you select that. Of course, if you select that choice shuffling, for this question, you have to be careful that you don't have an answer in there that's something like all of the above or the first and second answer, but not the third, and so on. And those are things that we occasionally do in multiple choice questions. You have to be careful not to do that if you choose to shuffle answers in a multiple choice question.
Okay, so Dave, I have one more question about this. Sorry to interrupt
Keep
so
going.
much. and maybe you said it, but I had to step out for 1 second. So the shuffle choices option in classic quizzes, it's for the whole quiz. So
Correct.
if you have one question that says all of the above, then you can't select that, obviously.
Right.
But I'm sorry, is this per
This is
question?
question by question, exactly what
Okay.
the point I was
Okay.
about to make. Indeed,
Okay.
this new quizzes gives you the option to choose whether you do this shuffling question by question. So if you had a question that had all of the above as the last answer, you would not select shuffle choices for that particular question. New quizzes also has an option to have the shuffling happen globally as well. So you have lots of options that you don't have in
Great.
classic quizzes.
Thank you.
You bet.
Dave?
Yes, go.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry if I missed this, but how do you set a time for the time limit on the quiz, like a half hour or an hour?
We haven't gotten to that yet.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's the next tab. Good question, though. It's certainly something we want to be able to do. We're not going to worry about outcomes. We're not using that. And let's say I want to save this question for later use. So that's a good question. I may use this in a future quiz. I can add it to an item bank right here. An item bank being a test bank, a question bank. And I can select add to bank. I can create a new item bank to add this to, or I can put it into an existing one. And here are the ones that are in this course. Let's see, is there anything, not really anything appropriate here. So I want to make this a new item bank, and I'll call it Zoom questions. And I'll add this question to that question bank and create the item bank at the same time. I have to be careful about my terminology. Item bank is the specific terminology for new quizzes. Question banks are the test banks for classic quizzes. And I get to choose. I'm going to edit there. And I'm going to, if I edit this again, I'm going to set the number of points here. Say I want this question to be worth 2 points. That's the default, will be the default then. And then I just click done. And that question is now part of my quiz and also part of my, part of a question bank or an item bank that I just created. All right.
Dave,
go ahead.
I'm a little confused about that last one because you set the number of total points the quiz is worth.
Right.
Aren't you just going to write in your 10 questions or whatever it is, and then it'll automatically calculate what each of those questions is worth?
No, you still get to assign a value to each individual question because some questions will be probably worth more than others, right? Like if you put in an essay question, it's probably going to be worth more points than within this quiz than a multiple choice question. And what you don't have to worry about is whether the total points, the sum of the points awarded for all, or possible points for all the questions in the quiz, don't have to add up to that number we put in, the 20 that I put in when I created the quiz. Each question can have any number of points, and the relative number of points can reflect the relative weight of each of the questions within the quiz, but you don't have to worry about what the final sum is because Canvas will do all the arithmetic for you.
All right, that's a math problem I'll have to figure out later. Somehow I'll just the connection. But I won't worry about it right now.
The short answer is it doesn't matter what this number of points is once you're outside the quiz. But if I create, say, an essay question now, and that's all I do to create the next question is just click the plus sign below the first question I've entered. If I decide I don't want this to be question 1 anymore, I want to put a question above it in the quiz, I can click this plus sign. So I can add questions anywhere that I like, and I can also move them up and down later if I want to reorder them. So we have all those capabilities. But let's say we'll just call this essay question 1. It says enter question prompt. That means enter the question, the text of the question. Discuss the importance of good quality audio in your Zoom meetings. That comes to mind because that's the session I did last night. All right. Then we have options different options associated with essay questions. This doesn't involve arithmetic, so I don't need to show the on-screen calculator, but I will need to provide the students with the rich content editor. That's checked by default. They have to be able to type their answers. Do I want them to have access to spell check as well, or do I want the spelling to be a part of the question? Is something I can grade? If I've specified a number of words that I expect in the answer, I might show them the word count. And I might set a limit to the number of words they can use. So grading notes, this is where I might put in a sample answer or whatever that I might use to help remind me what I was thinking when I wrote the question. The students will not see that, obviously. Bad audio will drive students out of your meetings, or something to that effect. Outcomes again, and I could add this to the item bank if I wanted to. If I add it to the bank, in this case, it'd be an existing bank because I just created a Zoom question bank, and I can add that to it. So, and oops, I didn't set a number of points, and maybe this one's worth 10 points. So if I were to stop right here, this quiz would contain 12 points. The sum of the possible points of the questions in the test would be 12 points, but the number of points awarded to the student in the grade book would be determined by the percentage grade. Let's say a student, since you might assign partial point, you still have to grade the essay questions yourself. So let's say the student got 4 points for the essay question and got the multiple choice question right. Well, that gives them 6 out of 12 points, or 50%. What grade, if the total value for the question was set in the creation screen at 20, what grade is going to be added into the grade book for them? 10 points, 50%, exactly.
Okay.
And you don't have to worry about that. And that makes it a lot easier to weight your assessments in your grading scheme. It's a deliberate design feature here. Okay, to
Dave, sorry for interrupting.
good.
I have a question.
Good.
So what I'm not seeing so far, and maybe you're coming to it, is the feedback that you can give students based on a correct answer and an incorrect answer that you can build in. Is that available?
At this time, I do not believe so, no. That's another feature that is missing. Let's see, let me make sure I'm correct about that.
Wouldn't that come when you're grading it, or once it's the test has been
No,
taken?
no, in classic quizzes, we can provide automatic feedback. You,
Oh,
you
okay.
can provide a message that the student will see once they finish the test, obviously, and they get their feedback, automatic feedback. It shows them how they did and what they got right and what they got wrong, if you allow them to see that. You can enter a message that displays they got this question right, another message if they got it wrong, or just a general message that's supplied question by question.
Yeah, and I actually use that all the time.
It's a wonderful thing to use, but it does not seem to be available here. That's a good question. I'll do a little more research on that and make sure I'm correct in that, but it does not appear to be available here. There's no option to add that sort of feedback at this point.
Okay, thank you. And I was about 5 minutes late coming into the training today, so you might have said this before. Right now we have the option to use classic quizzes or new quizzes.
Correct.
When is that option going to end?
There is no current sunset date for classic quizzes. They've backed off of that.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
for the foreseeable future, we're going to have both.
Okay. Thank you very
That may
much.
change at some time. There have been a lot of changes in the answer to that particular question over the last couple of years. But right now, they do not have a sunset date set for classic quizzes. So for as far as we know, we'll be able to use both indefinitely, which has caused a lot of people to breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, let's add another question. We could pick any of these question types, but let's say we have an item bank, a test bank that we want to add questions from. How can we do that? Well, we can go to this little icon right here, which used to say item bank, and now it just has a little folder with a little question peeking out of it. I guess they figured that was more intuitive. Threw me for a loop when I first saw this. That's a relatively recent change. Okay, and so that takes us to our item banks. And I can go and I can see, let's look at all of my banks that I have access to. And I have all of these question banks that I can pull questions from. Let's try this. Let's try adding one of the new question types. Here I've got a stimulus question, an ordering question, a hotspot question, a categorization question. I'm just going to add all of those. Bada bing. And you just click on the plus sign to add them, and they start showing up down here. So it's real easy to add questions from a question or an item bank into your developing test. And I can pick and I can pull questions from other item banks as well. So that's the equivalent of select questions in the classic quizzes. Everybody in the course or in taking the quiz will get these questions that we see so far. They can be randomized, and we'll see how to do that in a minute, but they're all going to get the same set of questions, just maybe not in the same order. In classic quizzes, we also have the option to have Canvas, as the student takes the quiz, to have Canvas pull questions at random from test banks. and generate a different set of questions for each student randomly. And New Quizzes has that capability as well. If I go to, let's see if I can remember how to do that. I go to a particular question bank. Let me just pick a U.S. history bank here. This is going to be a very eclectic test. I can select individual questions in the way that we just saw by just clicking on the plus signs there. Or I can click here where it says all or random. If I do that, I get down at the bottom where I get this question set, which is by default is set to pull all, well, there are 26 some questions, I think, or something like that in this bank. It's going to pull them all by default. That's usually not what we want. So how do we fix that? And that's what I'm trying to remember. Let's see. There we go. If I click on this, close this. If I click on the, and go back down to the bottom again, and click on the U.S. History CH4 bank, the name of the bank, I have the option to use all the questions if I wish, but usually we're going to randomly select questions. And I can choose the number of questions I want to pull from that bank for each student. Let's say I want 5 questions for each student. There were 25, 26 some odd questions in there. That gives me a pretty good random ratio there. That no two students are likely in a reasonable sized class to get exactly the same set of 5 questions from this question bank if they're pulled randomly. And I can also set the number of points I want to reward for each question. And then click done. This is actually, I think, quite a bit more, quite a bit easier to do this in New Quizzes than it was in Classic Quizzes. It just seems more more straightforward, more intuitive to me. That could just be me. But
Would
now, go
would you
ahead.
mind repeating that? I'm sorry, but would you mind repeating that sequence again? You're in Quizzes and you choose the test quiz, test bank.
You choose the test bank that you want to pull a set of questions from for each student.
Okay.
And then you, well, let's go back, show you that process. Yeah, that's
Okay.
one of the more complex ideas we're going to be dealing with. We go to, we do that again. We can go to add a question, and we go to the
That's right.
item bank icon,
Okay.
and we find the item bank that we want to use. Let me pick another one here. That was CH4. We'll use this one. And I click all random. That's the key. All random. And that allows me to create a new question set. If I go down to the bottom, if I close that item bank, and I go down to the bottom of the quiz, developing quiz again, and it's automatically picked all of the questions in that bank. Okay, it's going to add them all, which is generally not what we want. To alter that, I click on the name of the bank here in the quiz, and that opens up my ability, opens up this window that allows me to tell Canvas that I want it, instead of using all the questions in that question bank, to randomly select a group or a number of questions that I set here, like maybe 2 questions out of the 20 or so in that bank. So each student will get 2 questions selected at random from that test bank, from that item bank. And I can set the number of points that I want each question to be worth. when you pull a question set like this, all the questions within the set are going to have the same point value. So usually you try not to mix questions of different types in an item bank. You usually don't want both essay questions and multiple choice questions and true false questions and all that in the same bank. You usually try to segregate the banks by question type as you create them. But that's how we tell Canvas how many questions to pull from that particular question bank for each student and how many points they're worth. Did that help?
Yeah, that was great. And I think you said that once you develop the whole quiz, you can even randomize the order that the questions go.
We're about to go to the settings and see what settings you have. Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so that, we can keep going. You can make the test as big as you like, or the quiz as big as you like, but let's call it there. That's illustrated most of the basic concepts. We can preview the quiz if we want to here. But the next thing we'd probably do is set our test options or our test settings that determine how the test behaves. If we go to the settings tab, first option we see is that we can shuffle questions. And this is what we didn't have in classic quizzes. This will ensure that no two students get the questions in exactly the same order, or make it very unlikely that any two questions would get the same order, the questions in the same order. And you just select these by turning them on or off. You can shuffle answers globally if you wish. But if you set an individual question to either shuffle or not shuffle, that I believe will override the global setting. So you have that one question in there that has all of the above as the bottom answer in a multiple choice question. You can prevent that one from being shuffled and have all the others shuffled. So that's a lot more flexibility on that than we used to have. You can present the questions to the students one question at a time, just as you can in classic quizzes. You can require an access code. If the student, for instance, is going to be required to take the test in front of a proctor, you provide the proctor with the access code and the student can't get into it until they're sitting in front of the proctor. Same option you have in classic quizzes. You can set a time limit, hours and minutes. You can require the student to take the quiz from a certain range of IP addresses. That'd be if they were going to take it on campus in a testing center or something like that. Or you didn't want them to be able to take it from home. You could filter that. That's not something we use much. You can allow the student to pull up the calculator anytime they want it, if you wish. By default, the student will have one attempt on the test. If you want them to have multiple attempts, you can turn that on. And you can decide which score to keep if the student takes the test multiple times. You can determine how many attempts the student can have by setting that to limited and setting a number. If you don't change that, they can take it as many times as they like, which would be appropriate, say, for a practice quiz or something like that. And if you give them multiple attempts, you can set a time limit or a time delay that they have to, allow to elapse before they can take the test again. So it sort of forces them to at least think about what they missed, and instead of just starting it over again, and running the table, trying to hope they get lucky the next time. So, and you can, by default, the students will, when they submit the test, the students will see what they got right, and they'll see the questions, they'll see what they got right, what they got wrong. But you can restrict that by turning this option on. And this is similar to what you have in classic quizzes. uncheck all to hide result view and show submission confirmation only. That way the student knows that the test was submitted, but they get basically no feedback. They can show, you can choose to show points awarded, points possible, and you can show the questions. And you can show their response. You can indicate whether it's correct or incorrect. You can just show the correct answer in the case of an incorrect response. No, I guess you have to select those two. And
then-
no, there is item feedback.
Yeah, I was just seeing that.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. But these are all of the options that you have.
Dave,
Yes.
this is my kind of like, I teach writing. This would be
Yes.
like my dream. I usually want students to be able to have a dictionary, but I don't want them thumbing through it, or especially if it's on their phones, getting in their phones
Right.
until they're done writing something, then go back and using dictionary to help them proofread. Is there any way that you could put a dictionary on here, a spell
Dictionary.
checker?
Instead of the calculator, huh?
Yeah. And
Oh, that's an interesting idea. And I think
actually not let them use it until they're done, at the last end of the quiz.
that I can't think of a way
Yeah,
to
that's,
do that. But you could make the dictionary available in a set of questions. You could set up what's called a stimulus question. We'll take a look at that in a minute. And you could provide a link to the dictionary in the text of the stimulus, the directions basically that cover a series of following questions. And you could either give them a link, just a link to dictionary.com or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you could, you should be able to actually embed the dictionary.com site right into the text of the question, so that it would be right there and they could just use it without having to go back and click on a link in a previous set of text.
what I'm really afraid of is I usually nowadays they don't have a paper a hard copy dictionary anyway. I let them use their phones, but I'm always afraid they're doing other things on their phone.
Well,
Um,
there's not much you can do to ensure that they're not.
yeah.
What you can do is make sure that you don't give them enough time to be successful at that. That's
That's a good idea.
That's the number one security option in online tests, is don't give them time to cheat. Give them a reasonable but limited amount of time for each question, or, set your time limit accordingly. So if you've got 10 multiple choice questions, shouldn't take them more than 15 minutes to take that test. If they're having to look up the answer to each question, it's going to take them more than 15 minutes to take that test. So they're going to fail. So that time limit is your number one guard against that sort of thing.
Yeah, even when I have students write short essays in class, I'm always worried they're going to Google something and
yeah.
But I see what you mean, the time.
Exactly. If you don't give them time to look for something, because they're not likely to land right on something they can use.
Right.
So if you give them a reasonable amount of time to write, enough time to write the essay, it's probably not going to be enough time to search for an appropriate answer online. Especially if you have more than one essay question.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
So this is your best guard against that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I have my just right now at my I teach also at Southwestern. One of my final exam times is actually spread out over 2 days, just 1 hour, but for 2 different days. And in a way, I can see it's harder for them to cheat than if they had 2 hours altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Thank you.
It's something, at least these are options you do have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So those are your available settings, the test properties or test options. I'm not going to worry about reports right now. Moderation of the test allows you to make accommodations for students who need them. You can moderate question by question, or you can moderate the entire course for a student. Let's say, and these are the students that happen to be enrolled in this course. If I click for test student 1, if I click moderation on this test, I can provide that student with additional attempts. Sometimes that's a required accommodation. I can make time adjustments. My time limit is set to 1 hour. I can give the student additional time, or I can remove the time limit entirely. And I can set the exact number of minutes. Let's say I have to give them 1.5 times, so I might need to add 30 minutes to this. I think I can type that. Yeah. I might have to add 30 minutes to this. Let's see. Oh, didn't save that. Give additional time. 30 minutes.
Is there any way to work in a warning? Like you have 10 minutes left?
Yes, it does that automatically.
Oh, great.
It's set. It gives them a counter, a timer.
Oh, okay.
Right-hand corner, and it will also give them a warning. I think at 5 minutes.
Oh, great.
Okay. Now, why am I? Let's see. Why does this? Oh, because I already had this set. I can change this. Yeah, there we go. Now, I can use the moderate button here to change time and number of attempts for a student for this test. But I can also go to the this little pencil icon here, and I can set global options for this student on every quiz in the course, which is what I've done here. That's why it's not letting me make individual moderations. I can, under time limit multiplier, if the student is required to have twice the time that other students have, I can either give them additional time in a specific number of hours and minutes, or I can do a multiplier, and I can set that multiplier to 2.0 or 1.5 or whatever's appropriate, and save that, so that for all of the quizzes in this course, this student will get twice the time limit that is set nominally for everyone in the course. Whereas I would use the moderate button to set additional attempts or additional time for students for just this test, just this quiz. But the pencil here allows me to do it for the entire course, for all the quizzes in the entire course. And that can save you a lot of time. If you have 3 or 4 DSPS students in your class and you're giving a lot of quizzes, maybe 20 or 30 quizzes during the course of the semester, in that course, having to moderate each one of those quizzes and assign that student extra time in each one of those quizzes can get very tedious. This option, which is new to new quizzes, will allow you to cover that, or to set that for the entire course for that student. So that's a nice new moderation capability that you have in new quizzes that you didn't have in classic quizzes. Okie dokie. Let's take a look at what this quiz looks like to a student. And we'll also get to see the new question types. I want to show you those. Let's see where I am in the PowerPoint slides here. We've done all of this. We've created a new quiz. Now we're going to look at that new quiz, and we're going to look at these new question types. I don't have time. I've done this session several times. I know that I don't have time to show you how to create each of these new question types. So in the slide here, for each of these question types is a link to a tutorial that shows how to create a stimulus question, an ordering question, a hotspot question, and a categorization question. So this will give you the information you need on that. But let's see, it's fairly straightforward and fairly obvious once you see how the question works. So let's go and take a look at that. We're going to have our test student take this quiz. Alrighty, once we've built the quiz and set our settings and added any moderations necessary, we can click return. And that's going to save the quiz and take us back to our quizzes list. And here's the quiz we've been working on. If I publish that quiz, it will now be visible to students. If I either provide students access to the quizzes tool here, or if I put this quiz in a module. So let's go ahead and put it in a module. And I'll just add to the module a quiz. And here's the new quiz for seminar 11/16/2022. I'll add that item to the module. And since the module is already published, there's the link. So now that would give the student a way to access this quiz, because you're generally not going to want to give them access to your quiz list, because you're going to have things in there that you're probably still working on and they don't need to see. So I've put a link to that quiz into a module in exactly the same way I would put a link to a classic quiz. And I'll go to student view and I'll take that quiz. It takes it a second to load. There's a little more going on here than there's with classic quiz. Okay, so choose the first thing the student sees are the instructions, the time limit, and how many attempts they've made. At this point, they can back out if they're not ready to take it, or they can begin the test. And the multiple choice questions are going to be pretty similar to anything that they've done before. Indeed, this is not going to look that much different than the classic quiz to the students. I don't really have to worry too much about that. So here's our first question. Which of the statements is not true? That one is not true. I think I remembered Seth's right answer. We'll find out. Audio is important. We're not going to. Knowledge is good. List these U.S. presidents in chronological order by date of election. This is an ordering question. And it's very simple for the students. You don't really need to give them much training on this. Let's see. Oh, God. I think Lincoln came first, then Tyler, I think, man, I don't know. I had to look it up when I wrote the question. I don't remember the answer. But that's all I have to do is just drag them into the appropriate order. That's a very easy question type setup. And remember, you have those tutorials showing you how to create these. This is my favorite new type of question, the hotspot question. You provide the students with an image and ask them to click on something in the image to answer a question. And the question here is, click on the person in this photograph, which is the Solvay conference, the famous physics conference in Switzerland in 1927. And this is a who's who of modern physics. Who in this photograph won 2 Nobel Prizes in science? Usually people go for old Albert here, sitting in the center, Einstein. Anybody know what the answer is? That person stands out for another reason in this photograph as well. Or did you watch the movie Radioactive?
Fermi?
Nope.
The tall guy in the back?
Nope. Who stands out here?
Oh,
Marie Curie,
Mary Curie, yeah,
the only
female.
Slodowska, the only female at the conference. She's the only person at that time who had won 2 Nobel Prizes in science. Interesting point for those of you in of a sociological bent. All right, here we have a categorization question. Go ahead.
Can I ask you back on that question just above with the photograph? Now, can a student click anywhere on that photo?
They can click anywhere on it.
And it will get that.
They'll get that little
bullseye. Okay. All right.
But they have to be within that square or within a rectangle. When you set the question up, you draw a rectangle around the right answer.
Okay. All right.
And
I like this one.
I love.
Yeah, this is a neat one.
You can, it's more entertaining, and you can test things that you can't test with a multiple choice question or even an essay question, really.
I like this.
And much more efficiently. It only takes a student a minute to answer that or not. They're not going to be able to sit there and stare at the question until beads of blood break out on their forehead and get any help. Okay, here's a categorization question. I've got a series of possible answers and some categories. Classical music's always been one of my favorite courses I ever took in college was music appreciation. So here are some composers and some musical periods, and you're asked to. It's sort of like a matching question. You're asked to drag the composer into the appropriate period. Music history question. Brahms was a Romantic composer. Bach was Baroque. Beethoven was classical, though he presaged the Romantic. Mozart was the greatest composer of the classical period. My particular favorite, Tommaso Albinoni, was a Baroque composer, more or less contemporary of Bach. Chopin, certainly Romantic. No one was more wild and emotional than Chopin. Handel, a contemporary of Bach, also Baroque. Franz Liszt, or Haydn, the contemporary of Mozart. Papa Haydn, classical. Liszt, Romantic. George Gershwin, he was none of the above. He's a distractor answer. He doesn't fit in any of these periods. Note the direction. That's so easy to ignore. I love this type of question too. And then we have all these other usual question types that I'm just going to tree that. I'm not going to take the time. Besides which, I probably don't know the answer to too many of those. Even though I pride myself on some knowledge of U.S. history, I'm not going to embarrass myself there. So I'm just going to tree that. Besides, we don't have time. And we have some other things we need to look at. Once finished, let's see what else. Oh yeah, here's your time remaining up here. And you can hide that if you want to. If it's distracting you, you can hide it.
Do they still have the list of questions at the top? I don't see that.
It's
I
over
didn't.
here now.
Oh, duh. Okay, got it. Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Didn't see that.
And yeah, I hadn't noticed either, but so I've answered everything. If I submit and I haven't answered something, it'll warn me, just like classic quizzes. If I submit, a little warning. Are you ready? You sure you're ready? Sure, submit. And it grades it. And since I didn't restrict the feedback, the student immediately gets the feedback. They see how they did. That's their percentage grade. They got 6 out of 29. Took them 7 minutes and 9 seconds. They have another attempt. I didn't set a delay in between, so they could take it again right now if they wanted to. Here's their first attempt. Here's the questions, and this shows them what they got right and what they got wrong and what the right answers were. I got Marie Curie right anyway. So there's all the feedback. So you can do some neat stuff with new quizzes. And remember, you're not limited. If you choose to use new quizzes in one assessment, you can use a classic quiz in another if there's some reason to do so. But this is just, I think, has some real advantages in terms of presentation, question types, options, things like that over classic quizzes.
And Dave, I have a question if now's
Go
a good
for it.
time. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around the scoring portion. I don't think I got past you put in 20 points.
I tell you what, let me hit that again when we get done.
Okay.
I'll go through the whole thing again. And I'll use this particular attempt to explain it. Okay. I've just got a couple more things I really want to get to before we quit here. We got about 15 minutes left. So let me run back to my PowerPoint here. Remember, these will give you tutorials on how to create those new questions. Most of them are very simple. But there's a major issue we want to deal with, and that's migration. Many of us have lots of classic quizzes, and we probably really don't want to have to recreate them from scratch as new quizzes. If we want to use new quizzes because we like the options that we have and the capabilities we have in new quizzes, we surely don't want to have to recreate all of our quizzes, our classic quizzes, as new quizzes manually. And the good news is you don't have to. You can migrate classic quizzes to new quizzes automatically. You can do that quiz by quiz, or you can do it en masse when you copy your development, the content from a development shell or a previous live shell into a new shell. And we'll see how that works here real quick. Let's go back to Canvas, and I'm going to return here back to my quizzes list. Oops, that just took me back to the quiz. There, I'm back to the quizzes list. And I have let's go to my quizzes. There we go, my quizzes list. I have a classic quiz here that I created earlier. How do I know it's a classic quiz? Because the little spaceship icon next to it is an outline rather than filled in. New quizzes have the little icon filled in. So you can tell at a glance whether a quiz is a new quiz or a classic quiz. If I want this classic quiz 1 to be converted to a new quiz, all I have to do is go out here to the context menu, the 3 vertical dots associated with that quiz, and select Migrate. This option will only appear if you have enabled new quizzes in your course, but it will always be available for classic quizzes if you have. You just click migrate, and that's all you got to do. You get a little message that says, we're working on it. For a short quiz, won't take very long. And here it is down here. This is where it's going to appear, and bang, there it is. This, what says Classic Quiz 1, is now a new quiz. So probably I need to edit that. We'll call this New Quiz 1. And I can go in and I can build, I can view the questions and so on that I've already put in there, make sure everything's okay. But, I used a defunct question bank in that one, apparently, and that's my bad. That's an error on my part, not on Canvas's part. So, and then I can return. So that's all there is to migrating a classic quiz that you've already got to a new quiz. You can have some errors in that. There are some subtle differences between how question types work and so on, and between classic quizzes and new quizzes, among some of the more esoteric question types like formula questions and things like that. Occasionally a question may not migrate properly, and so you need to check them. But vast majority of the time it works like a shot, and there are no errors, particularly if you've stuck mainly with the more common question types like multiple choice, multiple answer, true, false, essay, and so on. And if there are problems, it gives you a summary of them up here, so you know what to look for. So it's a very simple process. When you go to copy a course and you have new questions enabled in that course, you do the usual thing, import course content, and say copy a Canvas course. You now have an option in your course, because you have new quizzes enabled in this course, you have an option to import existing quizzes from the source course as new quizzes. So they will, if you check this box, all of the quizzes in the source course will be copied over, and in the process of being copied, they will be converted to new quizzes. So you can do them en masse. You don't have to do them one at a time, if that's appropriate. You have the option of doing it or not. So migrating classic quizzes to new quizzes is very well supported. What's not supported especially well is converting question banks in classic quizzes to item banks that can be used for new quizzes. You can do it, but you have to do it bank by bank. You can't convert them en masse as you can with individual quizzes. And the process involves about 7 or 8 steps. I have in those tutorials that I showed you. Go back up a little ways here. In New Quizzes Help, if you go to our tutorials, in the list is a tutorial on migrating classic quizzes and question banks to new quizzes. This is about a 13-minute tutorial. The first 3 minutes are how to migrate individual quizzes, which is almost trivial. And the rest of the time is how to migrate question banks. If anybody would like to see me demonstrate that live, I'll be happy to, but that's going to take a little longer. We'll have to stay behind a little bit. I'm not going to have time to do that in the 2 hours. I've tried to do this several times. I just can't wedge that in, but I'll be happy to go through that with you if you're interested, or you can watch the tutorial. It's not it's not that difficult to process. It's just a little tedious because you have to. It's a kludge. You're having to make something do something that it really wasn't designed to do. It will work reliably every time, but you have to hold your mouth right and face the right direction and sling a rubber chicken around your head and things like that to make it work. All right. All right, now let's talk about, and in fact, here is that tutorial embedded in this PowerPoint slide. And remember, you have the link to this. I'll post that link again, or the link to the slide deck. I'll post that again here in a minute before I quit, in case you came in after that showed up or after I put that in the chat tool. But if you go to the chat tool, you should be able to find that link there if you were in the session at that time. If not, just let me know and I'll post it again. I showed you moderation already, so I don't have to do that. And that's the end. Okay. So we have two things on there. For sure, we have one request on how do those points work again? And that is one of the more difficult things to understand about new quizzes. It took me quite a while to get my heart right with that. So let's go back and take a look at that. And we'll use that quiz that I created and took as my test student to illustrate the process. So let's go back to quizzes here in this course. And here's that new quiz that we just created today. Let's go take a quick look at this. And here is the basic creation information for that quiz. And here are the points that I set. Okay. I chose, presumably because of how I wanted this to be weighted in my assessment scheme in the grade book, I chose a possible points of 20 for this quiz. That has nothing to do with nothing direct to do with the number of questions in the test or the number of possible points for each question within the test. It's the number of possible points I want this to add to the total possible points for my entire course. And that's determined independently of the number of questions in the test or quiz and the number of points available for each question. Let's see what the number of points available for actual number of points available in the quiz is. To do that, I go to Build. And let's see, where is it going to tell me that here? Oh, yeah, here it is, 29 points. Okay, the sum of the possible point values of all the questions is 29, not 20. So how does that work? How does Canvas decide what to put in the grade book for the student? Well, what Canvas does automatically, except in the case of the essay question, of course, you have to grade the essay question manually in the speed grader in the same way that you do with a classic quiz. And you assign, you type in the number of points that the student earns for that essay question. But other than that, the Canvas grades the questions and comes up with a point total. And I forget exactly what my test student was awarded for that, but it was something less than 29 because it was like I could go back and go to the test student and look in the grades and see exactly the number, but it was something less than 20, some number of points lower than 29. How does Canvas decide what to put in the grade book? Well, let's go look at the grade book here. I can return to my course, go to grades. I've got this, let's see, find that quiz in here. New quiz for seminar, this is it. Here's a submission for my test student. I have, right now, the test student has 4.14 points out of 20, but that does not include the essay question. That's why instead of seeing a number here, I see just a submission symbol. So I go to the speed grader in the usual way. It pulls up the student's submission, and I look for that essay question. And this one, let's see, audio is important. Well, that's not worth a whole lot. I'll give him maybe 2 points for that. Knowledge is good. Everybody watched Animal House, right? That's an Animal House sort of answer. But so I'll give him that, and I will update. So the student's grade out of 20 is now 5.52. What do I do with that? Well, let's see what the student, what appears in the grade book. Oops. Do want to submit that? Come on.
Hey, could I ask a question, Dave?
Go for it while this thing's waiting. Yeah.
So if I understand this right, and I possibly don't, the points that you give it in the very beginning, can we disregard that? Because the way I do it typically is in my assignments. That's where I indicate the weight of the different groups.
Yeah.
Whether I have an assignment, exercise, quiz,
Right.
those are all specified in their weight there.
Right. If you weight your assessments by assignment group rather than by individual assessments, that number that you assign to the test for the total possible points is less important. It does matter, however, that all of your, all of the exams, all the quizzes that you have within an assignment group should all have the same possible points on the assessment creation screen for the new quiz.
So if I have 2 quizzes in my whole course,
right,
and each one I grade them out of 100, whether there's 5 questions or whether there's 100 questions or whatever.
You're good.
But quizzes altogether are worth 15% of the grade.
But you weight that by weighting the assignment group, not by weighting the individual quiz, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's perfect. It's just if you have those two tests in the course should have the same possible point weight. Otherwise, one will be prioritized over the other, and you probably don't want that, it sounds like. One will be weighted higher than the other. If they don't have, if when you create the test, it doesn't have the same, if you create the 2 tests and when you're creating them, you don't give them the same number of possible points at the point where you create them, then you'll mess up your weighting.
It just seems redundant. It just seems like if I've already got all that set, it seems redundant to have to indicate.
But you still have to provide a possible points total. But you're right; it's less important as long as both of the quizzes have the same possible points. Then you just weight the assignment group, and that Canvas takes care of the arithmetic for you to create a weighted average.
Right.
Okay, so what you're describing, where each test would start off with 100 possible points, or rather 100 points in the possible points field in the screen where you create the new quiz, then you're golden. Then the weighting is done by the is done
Okay.
by the assignment group weighting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So what you're doing is great. And the new quiz
Yeah.
is quite compatible with that. Just when it asks you for the nominal number of points that you want, just put 100 for each of them.
Got it. Thank you.
But let's see what happened here. What do you mean? I've updated everything. I've submitted. I don't know why it's giving me static about going back here. Okay, so now if I look at that submission, didn't submit it. That's the one, isn't it? Yeah, not quite sure what's going wrong here. Let's go back to the speed grader. Did it save that essay? Yeah, it saved the essay. And it saved the essay grade. Oh, was there something else I had to manually grade? No, I don't believe so. I have fudge points just like I do in classic quizzes. Nothing to update. Let's submit that. And all right, so now I should be able to, I don't know why that's not saving. Not sure what I'm doing wrong. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong because it says it's been submitted. Oh, no, that was the student submission. Shoot. It's misbehaving and I don't know why. 8 out of 29 points. Okay. And it's showing here. I hit submit. That should put the grade in the grade book. I've done everything I need to do. So why, when I go back, does it tell me? Let's see if it got it. There it is. Don't know exactly what I did there. But there's the grade, 5.52 points. That's 5.52 out of 20, not out of 29. We do a little arithmetic here, which I need a calculator to do. Pull up Windows here. Okay, so it was 8 points of the 29 points that the questions added up to in that test. The student got 8. So what Canvas is doing is taking the percentage of 29 represented by 8, which we would get here by dividing 8 by 29. This 0.276 to 3 significant digits. And now what, or 27.6% to take, and what Canvas then does is take 27.6% of the 20 points that I told Canvas that quiz was worth. So I just multiply that number by 20 and I get 5.52. So that's what Canvas is doing to get this number right here. And remember that it used the 20 because when I created that quiz, I put a 20 here. I just arbitrarily said, I want this quiz to count for 20 possible points in the grade book. So Canvas is doing all this arithmetic for you, even though the actual point grade that the student got, the actual number of points the student earned on the quiz was 8 out of 29. What they get awarded in the grade book is that percentage of 20, which is 5.52. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I've made that point entirely adequately, but that is how that works. This is probably the hardest thing to grasp about new quizzes, to be quite honest. It does have some real advantages, especially if you are weighting your assessments in the grade book individually, rather than weighting them by assignment groups. If you're weighting them by the possible points that are associated with each assessment, it's a lot easier to make that work with quizzes in new quizzes than it is in classic quizzes, where you have less control over exactly what the possible points on a given quiz are. If you want a classic quiz to have a possible points of 20, possible point value of 20, you have to make sure that the individual point values of the questions within the test add up to 20. And if you don't have some nice even number of questions, you may have to assign fractional point values to make that happen. And it gets to be really tedious and really confusing sometimes with the students. Why is that question worth 1.67 points? What's that mean? So it's cleaner in the long run, the way that new quizzes compute is cleaner in the long run, but it's not perfect by any means, and it is a little bit more, a little bit less intuitive. I hope that helped. I've approached that about every way I can think of right now. This has been recorded. You can come back and look at that again and see if it makes more sense the third or the fourth time. I admit to having had to go through this several times and read several help things before I could get this to work. Now,
Hey, Dave, I know it's
Karen, go
time.
for it. No, I'm happy to keep answering questions as long as you have them. Do not hesitate.
Well, I realize your audience is thinning out, but I just had I was wondering if anybody else had run up against this, but in classic quizzes, and I don't use a lot of quizzes.
Wise move, yeah.
But I have had problems with where they have to write in the answer. And this was a numerical answer, or it was expressed in feet and inches, and I tell them specifically how to write that. No spaces here, space here, whatever.
This is a fill in the blank question?
It's a fill in the blank question, yeah. And there are like maybe 5% of my students every semester have everything marked wrong, or they'll mark, I'm sorry, they've answered it correctly and the quiz is marked wrong. And I cannot figure out why this is happening.
Well, that is the disadvantage to fill in the blank questions, because Canvas can only compare their answer to yours slavishly and without any judgment.
But when I look at their answer, it is correct.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
I do use a lot of questions, and I have fill in the blank, and I see the same thing. And oftentimes with my students, it's spelling error or, but here's an example. So one of my questions is, the answer is 53%, right? And what I've noticed is students will find very unique ways, different from others, to write 53%. They spell it out in words. They will use the percent sign. They will spell the percent sign. And so what I've done to try to capture a lot of that, because I've seen all these different ones, is I actually have created the answer to compare it to this or this or this or this.
You always have the option to put in additional acceptable answers for filling the blank. And you have that in new quizzes as well. But even sometimes when the student appears to have typed the exact thing that you provided to them as an acceptable answer, it still marks it wrong.
Yep, that's what's happening.
And it can be things like the student reaches for the keyboard and reaches for the shift key and hits the control key instead and inserts a non-printing character into the string, which Canvas sees and you don't.
Oh, well, that one I could not catch.
There's no way for you to catch that. It's why fill in the blank questions are so perilous.
Yeah.
I don't like them for that reason. I will tell you that there is something, you have much more options with fill in the blank questions in new quizzes. It has some artificial intelligence algorithms that operate that you can activate, and it can judge, it uses some AI judgment on looking at the answer.
Okay.
And if the answer is judged close enough by this AI algorithm, it will give them credit for it. So it gives them a little more leeway than they have in the classic quizzes. And there are actually several different ways you can have Canvas judge those fill in the blank answers that make it a little less likely the students are going to get marked wrong when they typed in the right answer. It's still not perfect, but it's better, much better.
All right. I'll shift it over to the new quizzes next semester and see how.
And I tell you what,
how it goes.
I am going to, that's a really good point you bring up. And I deliberately did not use a fill in the blank answer as an example today because it pops up a discussion that takes too long. But that's something I've been thinking about for a while. I need to do a tutorial on fill in the blank questions in new quizzes and how the different options you have to have Canvas evaluate those answers and show some examples and so on. So I'm going to move that up on my list of tutorials that I need to create. And Karen, if you wouldn't mind reminding me of that, just send me an email.
Sure.
I'll make sure I send you a link to the tutorial when I get it done, since you're the one whose excellent question prompted me to think back about that.
Well, it sounds like it'd be a nightmare. Typically, all they're doing is writing so many feet and so many inches.
Yeah.
And I tell them exactly, no spaces, put a dash in between. I tell them exactly what to do.
I hear you.
And when I look at the right answer and I look at their answer and I look at the correct answer, they're identical. They're identical.
Yeah.
So I just go in and hand grade it and just go, okay.
Well, that's what you have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
When you get that feedback, I swear I got that right. Look. So it almost makes it an essay question or a short answer question. You have to go in and grade it by hand anyway.
I just didn't know if it had something to do with using a Mac over a PC.
It's
font, using a certain font. Because it's sometimes the whole test, the whole quiz, they get a 0 on it, but everyone is correct. Or maybe I'll catch one that wasn't correct, but the whole test is 0.
Would you mind if I looked at an example of that in one of your?
I'll send you a screenshot of it when I send you an email.
Send me the information I would need, because as an administrator in Canvas, I can access that if you don't mind. And I can look at it and see if I can see anything.
Yeah.
I'd be fascinated.
I don't know how to do that. Does that mean I'm sharing my Canvas access? Is that
no? Just all I need to know is the CRN of the course and the quiz, the name of the quiz involved, and the name of the student, so I can look at their attempt.
Okay.
If I have those 3 pieces of information, I can look. We do not go in and look at your courses unless you ask us to.
Right. No, I just didn't.
Somebody, the system administrator always has the capability to see anything. We're just very careful about how we use it. But if you ask me to do that, I'll be happy to go in and take a look and see if I can figure out what's going on. And if I can't, I can get somebody to submit that question to Canvas, and maybe we can get them to tell us what's going on.
Yeah. Okay.
That's something I'd like to clear up.
Yeah, and I got to make sure I know which one was wrong, because
I got to remember.
I'll do what I can. Yeah.
All right.
Into it.
Great.
Thanks a lot for all the information today.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
Helpful.
Is there anything else I can do for you?
No, the only other problem I had was occasionally images that I put in quizzes were not able to be seen by all students. And we kind of thought maybe they were using Max for that. But I haven't had that. I haven't been using that quiz recently, so I won't bother you, but I don't know if that's ever a
Well,
case.
certainly I've heard that before,
You have, okay.
but usually that was a problem we used to have a lot with Blackboard, but not so much with Canvas. So I'm not quite sure why that would be happening. It could be browser settings on the student just using an old browser, old web browser, or an unsupported web browser to access Canvas.
Okay.
It could also be, it might well be a function of a mobile device as well. They may be using a mobile device, which has maybe an outdated web browser on it because they're accessing, or it may be an outdated version of the student app in Canvas. There's a lot of factors that might come into play there, but usually it's not something that like an entire class would not be able to see in an image or something like that in a quiz.
Right. No, it was just select few.
Yeah, it
I
probably
think-
has something to do with the web browser they were using.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that.
You bet.
That's all I got. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks both
Thank
of you
you.
for coming and for all the great questions and comments. I do appreciate that.
Take care.
Welcome.
I will, and as always, if you have specific questions, if something comes up later, just email me and I'll get back to you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Take
Dave.
care.
Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.